So we'll kick off for any of you that were here a little bit ahead of time. Serena and I were just catching up, and now we're officially gonna start. So welcome everybody. Thank you so much for taking the time to care about well-being. It is so incredibly important. It goes into every part of our lives. And when Serena and I were talking about, what do we want to share with all of you today about our data, passion, experience, one thing that we realized is doing a lot of research and doing a lot of reading is, of course, the productivity is still on top of minds for many organizations and for many business leaders, for many CEOs. They're held accountable for the bottom line. It's been a challenging few years. This one doesn't look like it's going to be easy peasy lemon squeezy either. And so when we think about, businesses and what resonates with our leadership and how can we make a case to make well-being front and center and really important, we thought tying it into productivity would be really critical. And so we're going to talk about well-being. That's going to be our focus, but we're going to continue to bring it back to data that really ties into output, specific numbers, just in case any of you who are on here are saying, I'm really sold. I know that worker well-being is incredibly important. However, I'm not the ultimate budget holder, or I don't get to always make these decisions. I'd love to have budget. I'd love to allocate more of it, but I really feel like I need more data. And to make a better case, we'll definitely share some of that information with you as well. So, before we get started and jump into all the different numbers, what I'm going to do is introduce ourselves. First, I'll introduce me, and then I'll give Serena a chance to introduce herself. So, my name is Sonia Lucina. For those of you who don't know me, I have a PhD in organizational psychology, and I have dedicated my career really to thinking about how to make employees happier. And for me, it was a very personal thing as a young immigrant moving from former Yugoslavia to the United States. I've really experienced how much somebody's career and that change, really how personal it can be. And I know a lot of what we talk about is that your self worth is not tied to your job and it's not tied to your career, and it's so much bigger than that. But a lot of times we feel that impact, and we feel that when we're happy at work, it really goes to all different parts of our lives. And when we're not, it makes it more difficult to enjoy our family, to enjoy our friends. And so really that was the big passion of mine when I was in college and when I heard of the field of industrial and organizational psychology, which I'd never heard of and what it stands for. And that's really what motivated me to go into this area. Well, fast forward some years, and in about 2007, I came across a company called Question Pro. And at the time, I was working for another organization called Career Builder, and I wanted to launch these big job seeker surveys. So at the time, Career Builder was getting about 25 million applications a month. And so imagine this is 2007, right at the brink of when we were talking about big data and analytics. And so at the time, as a leader of a talent intelligence unit at Question Pro, I partnered, or at Career Builder, I partnered with Question Pro to help us get these massive amounts of data and build online portals and really understand what is it that job seekers are looking for in their employer. Well, fast forward to 2024, a few years ago, Vivek, the CEO of Question Pro, had reached out to me and said, "Hey, would you like to come and lead the team?" And I thought, Question Pro was somebody that was very influential to me at the beginning of my career. I saw how many organizations I was able to impact as a client of Question Pro, how I was able to use that data and really make employee experience better. And I thought, wow, if I can join Question Pro and do that at a larger scale, that sounds amazing. Let's do it. So, for the last 3.5 years, I've been president of a business unit at Question Pro called Workforce. And what we do is really specialize in employee surveys. So, we specialize in the entire life cycle, and we work with organizations on understanding from the moment that the person enters your organization and onboarding, all through their different stages. And if they have to leave, How are they doing? How can you better connect with your employees? Ask your employees about their experience, whether it's about well being, whether it's about career development, or any other array of different things, to really make sure that you're building a culture that you promise to them, and a culture that they feel excited to be a part of, or when they feel seen and heard. And so that's my role today. And Question Pro as an organization actually also focuses on customer experience. So, more to come in a different webinar about combining customer experience and employee experience. And we also focus on research. So, working with different organizations, whether it's helping them understand their customers, or universities doing research. We have a really large research suite and business unit focusing on that area as well. We're a little bit over 300 employees. We're global, so headquartered out of the US, but really touch every different part of the world. And I mentioned I was a customer of Question Pro from 2007, and the organization was founded in 2005. So as a company, we've been around for quite a while now. So that's just a little bit about me, so you have a better background as we're sharing the data, where I come from, why I'm so passionate about this. Serena, thank you so much for joining me today. I know, like, well-being for you and me, we became such good friends because we bonded over this topic. And I love the fact, so Serena was actually one of our special guests at our company event last year in October in Austin, Texas. Her and I have done a podcast. I feel like after we met and realized we have this shared passion, like any opportunity we get to talk privately and publicly, we like just grab it, whether it's over a call, over a Zoom, over a WhatsApp, or a webinar. It's something that both of us are really passionate about, and something that we're spending a significant amount of our time really focusing on. So, Serena, thank you so much for joining me today. Before we jump into all of the data and insights that we have prepared for the webinar, can you please tell our guests and our friends that are on with us today a little bit more about you and your background?
Yes, of course. Thank you so much for having me. And I feel like we have gotten to just enjoy this conversation on well-being and formal and informal conversations. And thank you for joining my wellness challenge earlier this year as well. You are one of the few that made significant progress, so kudos to you. You may not know this. I actually started as a psychology major, Sonia, many
Yeah,
years ago.
I didn't
So,
know
yes.
that.
And then I went to the dark side and got my PhD in economics. I specialize in econometrics and labor economics. So that's the intersection of people and data. Throughout my career, my passion had always been empowering people through transformative insights. And I ended up building people analytics teams at companies like GE, Kraft Heinz, and most recently at PayPal. And I saw firsthand how data and human potential really intersect in my role as a tech executive. And I had always loved sharing knowledge. Sonia, I'm surprised we haven't run into each other prior to last year in person. I loved it so much that even as a tech executive full time, I would take on somewhere between 30 to 50 speaking engagements in my free time per year. So fast forward to post
Kudos to
pandemic,
you. That's a great
right?
service to our field.
I think my record was a 1 a.m. webinar for APAC audience. I was fully dressed with hair done and everything, because it was when everyone was awake and was able to come. So yeah, so I realized I really wanted to expand how I use my skills and influence. So I decided to launch this company called Data with Serena, and I'm on a mission to help the world learn to love data with Serena. And last year, I spoke in front of 10,000 live audiences within 10 months and an additional 12,000 virtual audience. What that means is I have seen all kinds of technology glitches out there, and I am very comfortable with or without slides and lights or whatnot. So definitely takes practice. And yeah, so I also do corporate training on data analytics. One of my passion has been teaching people how to influence decisions with data storytelling. Data is great, but if it doesn't result in any decisions, it's just overhead and cost. So So that's been very popular, and I also talk about AI and the future of work. Starting many years ago, I was on this future work council in my company, and it felt like it was light years away. And here we are, remote work. We're still debating.
Yeah.
AI is everywhere. So, yeah. And finally, I my side job is a LinkedIn creator. So yes, it's a real thing. LinkedIn is a social media platform now, and I teach people how to create brands that attract success. So nice meeting you all, and feel free to reach out if I can help.
Thank you. Well, what an incredibly impressive background. And I feel like I've heard you introduce yourself, I don't know how many times now. And every time I'm like, I didn't know that, or that's so cool. And one of the many things that had jumped out to me when you were saying you were doing a presentation at 1 in the morning. Girl, I tried doing that presentation tonight and the GGBGs that come out of my mouth, like I can't get the words out. I remember trying to do that again. I was like, I got the outfit, I'm ready. And then usually, like, I've tried to get better at public speaking and test myself to be eloquent. I mean, I felt like it was nonsense coming out of my mouth, and I think it was because I was so tired. Hence the
Yeah.
well-being thing, like, we all learn our strengths and things we're
Yes.
not that great at, and we lean into our strengths, and for me personally, I think if I ever have an offer to do anything at that time of night, I'm gonna call you and pass it on to you because nobody wants
Sounds
my
good.
GPGs and the weird things coming out of my mouth.
We can tag team.
Yes, absolutely. Well, thank you. Thank you for sharing your background. And I hope for all of you joining us today, it gives you a little bit more of an understanding. Again, we're always so grateful. Time is all of our biggest assets. And so anytime somebody joins one of our webinars, I feel like it's the best gift you can give to us. And so we want to make sure that we give a gift back to you and that you learn something. And I think having a context around like, okay, well, there's Sonia and Serena, these two women, like why should I believe what they're saying is important and why should I take value? So hopefully we build some credibility with you so that way when you grab the data and when you grab some of our insights, you feel like you're in good hands and you feel like you've got him, from a good knowledgeable source. So now jumping into the data, why should we care about well-being? What's such a big deal about it? So we have a lot of data slides because as you can tell, both Serena and I love data. However, as she mentioned, if you just have numbers and you don't tell a story, it's not really that useful. But what we want to do is arm you with some numbers and research. Again, depending on where you are in your journey, if you're at the point where you have a well-being budget or a wellness budget and your organization's behind it, and you're thinking like, I'm hungry for ideas and I want to know what to do. I celebrate you and I applaud you. And that's an incredible place to be. For a lot of people that we talk with, unfortunately, that's not the place they're in yet. A lot of individuals, a lot of organizations are saying it's a tough year. It's been a few tough years, and we really need to be really smart about where we invest. And I'd love to do well being, but it's not gonna come without a fight, or it's not gonna come without making a good case for it. Or even for me personally, there are a few things I'm very passionate about that I feel like are important to our organization, and I personally need to pick. So, for all of you that are here, we'll have information, but certainly if you're somebody that's trying to make a case for it, we wanted to, bring in some numbers and some research. So, the first bit, this is a Gallup study. It's not something that's coming personally from Question Pro or from Serena's research, but we wanted to share this because we put a link at the bottom if you want to look at the report. Why does well-being matter? And we'll talk a little bit more later around, whose responsibility is it? Is it really an organization's responsibility? I would say that the mindset has been shifting and more organizations and more leaders understand the impact of well-being. However, there are still people, especially maybe individuals that have been around in the workplace for a long time, like well-being is not something we really talked about 10 years ago, even 20,
Yeah.
30 years ago especially. It's
Right.
a relatively new concept. And so some of these numbers are just to share, like, why does it matter, and why does it matter in terms that people can relatively easily understand, like medical bills, medical costs, organizations' insurance, and what we have to pay for employees is an exorbitant amount of cost for a company. If you think about, for example, the stat that 75% of medical costs accrued are mostly due to preventable conditions. When you think about the well-being, and if we don't cause extra stress, if we don't cause anxiety, if we don't cause stress that's going to cause people other illnesses, or if people come to work not feeling well because they're scared to take a day off and they spread it around, that's a huge cost to the company. And Serena, one of the things that I love that you talk about, and I love, like, I learned so much from you in your different roles and different organizations, is really tying it to these dollar amounts, because these dollar amounts
Yeah.
speak to executives. Like, this is how
Yes.
much money you can save, and this is why.
Right.
So I'd love for
Yeah.
you to
If
share. Yeah.
we're on the same wavelength. Yes, if you take nothing else from today's talk, I want you to remember just one thing. That is, in my 10 plus years in data analytics, in corporate America, money talks. That's it. Money talks. Okay. I was able to quadruple the size of my team in one of the organizations I joined within about 6 months. And that didn't come from me being a pretty face. That came from me making a case for the benefit of these additional team members. How did I do that? Well, I tied those benefits to dollars, whether it's turnover. Again, the two things that you can think about that your CEO and CFOs will care about, one is top line. Second is bottom line. So whatever you're proposing that will improve well-being, does it increase the top line benefit for the company or bottom line? Meaning, does it increase revenue or does it save on cost? If it doesn't do either of those things, I'm going to guarantee you, I don't know your CFO, but they're going to say no. So, so especially these days, everyone is experiencing really tight budget. In one of my roles in the past as a head of people analytics, I was helping my head of well-being work on a strategy to get more budget. How did we do that? We looked at things like absenteeism. So in addition to turnover, absenteeism in a company costs a lot of money, especially the preventable ones, especially the unscheduled ones. So if you think about what causes people to not show up to work, okay, yes, we understand the day after Super Bowl, that was a little different. But other than that, it's probably because either they're not feeling well physically, mentally, or someone in their home isn't feeling well. So how do you prevent that from happening? And how do you make sure you have a workforce that's ready to take on the additional work when someone is gone as well? So it can be used in a variety of different ways. And you don't have to take this slide and show it to your boss. That probably doesn't do much. I would recommend taking this slide and think about what data points you have in your organization right now on turnover. How many people left last year? How many people are you expecting will resign this year? Absenteeism, do you have data on that? How much of it is due to planned versus unplanned absences? All those are really useful data points for you. And then you can take something as simple as an average salary, hourly rate, to come up with a cost that will get your CFO's attention.
Yeah. And I love that you say that, because I think a lot of times people will look at numbers and people will think about different experiences and say, but I don't have like a 10-person people analytics team that can run this, right? Like, I have a
Right.
small team, we're doing a lot. And so to your point, sometimes even to do some basic math and calculations is
Yeah,
still really powerful, because you can give a rough estimate to your leader and you can say, hey, the investment we're looking at is this.
exactly.
Here's this external research that I've done. So when I did this math, and it's even rough math for our organization, this is the number that it would impact. So look at the investment versus the cost. Again, that's, one thing that I think about, through all my years of going to different conferences. And there was one particular conversation I remember having in London where there was a speaker from Google. And I thought, oh, I'm really looking forward to hearing what they have to say. And the woman next to me said, it's nice, but we don't have Google's
Right.
resources. And so when they share their stories, it's lovely to hear what they can do. But I feel like I can't, like, I get inspired, I get excited, but I don't feel like it's something that I can replicate in my particular organization. So
Right.
that's one thing I want our listeners to, think about as well, is that there's always going to be organizations that are doing these big, huge things and these analysis, and you're going to be thinking, no way can I do that. But that's not necessary. I think to Serena's
Yes,
point,
absolutely.
tying to a dollar amount as much as possible, even if it's something rough, like the leaders will understand what the meaning of it is. It doesn't have to be like, oh, I got together a team of 10 PhDs and we ran these,
Right.
algorithms, and then we actually even included AI in it. Like, forget about it. Like that.
Yep,
Don't, as we would say, like I remember when I was younger, analysis paralysis, like don't put yourself in that position. So
absolutely.
um, we also ran a study of Question Pro. So at the end of last year, we asked 10,000 workers. The study was conducted in the US, and we asked them like 100 different questions. I'm very grateful for them answering all of them. And so we went in and pulled just some insights around like what's going on with well-being. So what's the current state? So we found that about a quarter of employees are very satisfied with their overall well-being. And that's like if you think about a Likert type scale, it's like the, strongly agree one. So they're like, yes, I've got this. I've got this. Probably if you look at the ones that kind of agree, it gets closer to a 50%, but about a quarter of people feel like really good about it. 28% of people feel like they can achieve their objectives while still having a good balance between work and family and social life. So, some of these questions, as you'll see as we go through, the reason we're asking them in different ways. And the reason why we're doing that is because to our earlier conversation, the debate around remote, in person, hybrid, fixed hours, flexible hours, like what do we actually do? Um, we're big believers at the end of the day, it's about achieving your objectives. And so then when it gets to, okay, like, can I rest? Can I disconnect from work? So 32% of people said they can disconnect from work and find time to rest at the end of the day. So I haven't, to be honest, in the recent months followed, like I think it was some of mostly like European company laws, but some organizations decided, listen, we're going to shut down email after hours. Like, we're not leaving it in your hands. Like, we're just going to make sure people don't get company communications, and that's it. But what was interesting in this data that I think we can unpack a little bit and we dig into it a little bit more in a bit is that so 32% say they can disconnect from work, but only 23%, so think it's almost a 10 percentage point difference, say they have enough energy after work to do what they need to do. So, Serena, I'd love your opinion on this. What jumped out to me is that it's not necessarily about what happens only after work, but it's
Mhm.
also what happens during the day. It's like, and there are a lot of tips. And I know I was reflecting at lunch before having this conversation around, take a break, take a walk, go outside, stretch, do something. Don't run from meeting to meeting. I have to say, I'm still a complete work in progress for that. I don't feel personally at the end of the day, it's very rare with exceptions. And my colleagues, my boss will call me and say, I absolutely need to talk to you. This is on fire. I feel like we're very respectful of that. But I do have to say, I very much empathize with the people not having enough energy because I work from home and I work generally until 6 because that's when our nanny leaves. And usually I have a meeting until 6 and I take a deep breath and I go downstairs to a very energetic 5.5-year-old. And let me tell you, my energy not anywhere to close matches his energy. And so I started to reflect on this because I thought, wait a minute, when you think about the overall well-being, what this data is telling me is that yes, I'm not advocating to bother people, with unnecessarily emails after work, but what I'm seeing it here is that probably the time during the day matters even more how we manage it to see, are we able to balance our life? Are we able to do the different things? And are we actually able to enjoy that time we can disconnect from work after work? Or are we just, oh, on the couch saying like, please just, give me a TV show. Maybe I'm going to have a dinner, sitting over here, not talking to anyone. So Serena, from the research that you've seen, and again, and I applaud organizations that try to draw that line. I'm not saying it's not necessary, but this bit about having enough energy after work to do the things that people want, like it really jumped out at me in comparison to the top one. So, what are some of your thoughts on that? What are some of the things you've seen organizations do well or maybe not do well that they're not conscious of?
Yeah, I think that's a great question to ask, and actually one that I haven't seen in a lot of well-being and health related surveys. And it matters, right? Because what it tells you is whether or not your work only you only have energy for work in your life. If you only have energy for work in your life, that means you don't have energy for other things in your life.
Yeah.
And we are human beings. We're not human doings. So even though it feels that way sometimes, so we're not just here to work. We also want to have time with our family and friends and do yoga, for example. So if you don't even have the energy to do anything else, that's a huge problem. And I think what it also reflects is interesting research and news that's starting to come out, right? All these trends about lazy girl jobs. And it's clear that the hustle culture is starting to die a little. One of the surveys I saw recently is that about 60% of millennials are willing to take a 20% pay cut for better work-life balance.
Yeah.
60% of millennials in America are willing to take a 20% pay cut for better work-life balance. Things are bad. Well, why millennials? Of course, I think millennials always get a lot of heat. Now the Gen Z is as well. But a lot of millennials, especially the older millennials, are kind of in the sandwich generation of having to take care of their children who are young, or maybe they're teenagers, and then they're aging parents. Um,
Yeah.
it's it's quite difficult. So you throw everything on top of that, life becomes almost unmanageable. So and so I do think a generational view is interesting if you're thinking about doing some kind of survey within your organization, taking a look at different demographics to identify where in your employee base do you need to support them better. Of the 26% that are very satisfied, that seems low and a little bit sad. So I'm curious if that's different for men and women. Is that different for
Yeah.
different generations? Is that different for your employees in different locations? For those who are at the headquarters, are they more satisfied with their well-being because you have an on-site gym that people can go to? But for those who are remote, they don't get any support. Again, think about those hypotheses that you can actually test with data, and then go collect your own data, whether it's a simple survey or something longer, and figure out what those numbers are. I think the worst you can do is not knowing. So,
Yeah.
but maybe that's just me because I love data. I would I would always rather know. I mean, it's a simple question I ask the business leaders as well, who are worried about, oh, we can't address every concern that come out in a survey. And I just ask them, would you rather know or would you rather not?
Yeah.
If you would rather know, let's ask. If you would rather not
Yeah.
know, then then don't. But coming back to the employees and say, hey, we heard you and we don't have time or resources to address everything, but we're working on it and we heard you. That's really important.
Yeah. Well, so I'll tell you one funny thing. When I was analyzing this data, I started looking at the generational differences. It's not in this deck. I didn't get to the point of actually like feeling like I had enough time to process to put it in. But I'll tell you one thing, because as you were talking, I'm like, wait a minute. So as I was looking at different age breakdowns, one thing that really struck me, and I wanted to think about an explanation, but I have a hypothesis right now is that all of these stats at 44 just jumped like fell off a cliff because there was
Hmm.
like whatever, like I forget the age group, 2, 43, and then 44 and higher. And this might be too much information for those of you listening, but I'm 43. And I, oh no, what's gonna happen next year? Like, no, 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 I need to look at all of this before like I share like but you know what's also interesting too is that like it might be a generational difference in how people are processing different things. So I've always kind of held on like where is the cutoff between
Mm,
millennials and Gen X?
right.
And I'm kind of like also, like, my birthday is spanning Aries and Taurus, so I'm always in between different things, so I guess I get to choose my own story. So I was like, "Oh, I'm a millennial, I'm a millennial." So anyways, more to come up, but, Serena, I know, and we'll talk about Gen Z a little bit, later in the conversation too, but as you were mentioning that, as I was going through the data, I started to know some differences, but I thought, "Well, let me keep that for another conversation because I think there's a lot to unpack, and a lot of times in our research, we found differences between men and women, and so there's so much more. So imagine, I mentioned at the beginning of the webinar that we asked a little bit over 100 questions in our research study, and imagine the demographics. Like we asked everything from how long people have been working to age, gender, race, size of company, industry. And I've looked at some industry data too, and there's not too many surprises, again, not in this presentation. If any of you, by the way, are interested in learning more, send me a note after because I'm just trying to prioritize and find time when to look at all this information. But there's definitely, to your point, some fascinating generational differences. So maybe we can continue that conversation in another webinar and dig
Yes.
into it a little bit
I mean,
more.
I'm signing myself up for this data, by the way.
Let's do it. I didn't even share the data set with you. I'm like, "Oh my god," like it's, like a little kid in a candy store, and I just need more time and not to get a stomach ache, so I'm trying to balance.
Yes.
So we also asked because now we're going to start to do some crosstabs of the data. So, how it inspired our workers to excel in their jobs? And again, for full transparency, because I'm also in my role, I do research. Like as Serena and I were saying, we're both PhDs, and I also do marketing. And so there's like sensationalism, and what do you share in data? So when I did these cuts of data, I looked at again like people that strongly agreed with statements. So there were not the everybody that's like, yeah, 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 I want to go above and beyond, but like how many people like really want to go and excel in their job and go above and beyond. And so we asked it in a couple different ways. You can see the results are similar because it gets at the similar idea. So 38% of people said that it's important to them not only to meet their goals, but to exceed them. And 36% said they're motivated to go above and beyond what's required in their job. So these are like a third of the people are in the extreme. So when we're asking, you know, how are you doing? Are you just like, oh, for the love, I just want to get my paycheck and like get me out of here? Or like, no, this is actually important to me. More than a third of people like really want to do well. Like they're not burnt out from succeeding. They're not at the point where they're saying, yeah, I'll put in the hours, but I don't really care. Like people care. I think more and more we're realizing that our jobs and our careers are a significant part of our life. And so why not make the most of it, right? Why be mediocre? Like as parents, we don't think like, oh, as long as the kid survives, I guess it's okay. Like generally we're thinking, has he learned how to ride a bike? Like, is he learning to read? What kind of grades is he or she getting? Sorry, a little personal, obviously, to my life situation, but similar when you think about the job. And so I think that these numbers were important to look at because, again, in some sensationalism of headlines, like bad news, as we know, like any of us that watch the news, unfortunately, bad news tends to sell. And a lot of times you can have data that really twists things and says people have had it, nobody wants to do anything anymore. We talk a lot about quiet quitting. And I'm not saying that none of those trends are true, but I also do want to show that, the other more positive side, the more optimistic part of me is that there are people who continue on to do well. And so, why do we look at this data? Well, because we wanted to compare it to well being. And out of these individuals who are saying, yes, I want to do well, like I really want to do well, like for my company, but for me too. Like I want that raise, I want that promotion, I want to feel like I'm making a difference. We started to see a really big difference. So we talked about having enough energy after work. And we looked at the people who strongly agreed that they have enough energy after work and who strongly disagreed and said, like, I really don't. So, like, those polar opposites. So, 69% of workers who said, like, absolutely, I have enough energy to do what I need to do after work said they're motivated to go above and beyond, compared to only 24% who said they have enough energy and are motivated to go above and beyond. So if you think about that, like if you think about people that you're putting a lot of work on and finally they're getting tired and tired, at some point they're likely to say like I've got nothing left to give and like I really love my job and I do care for it, But if I'm so exhausted, like I'm not showing up to my family anymore, I'm not doing these things, like, you know what? It's, of course, it's important for me to have a job. For the majority of us, like, we need it for a living. It's not to be able to like rent a yacht somewhere and, take your family on a cruise. It's to put food on the table. But am I gonna like really just continue to burn myself out and like continue to miss my kids' plays and miss graduation and miss these significant moments? Like I just can't anymore. Um, Serena, I'd love to. I don't think like intuitively people looking at this are like, "Oh, I'm shocked," but I think the percentage spread is really big. Like,
Yes.
I'd love any of your opinion and more color commentary or experience with this data.
Yeah, and burnout is a hot topic in a lot of organizations, and obviously there's different dimensions of burnout. So, having energy is great, but there's also other aspects of burnout where you may start to become cynical of things at work and and become less optimistic about your future and things like that. So there's certainly, one I'll comment that there are other aspects of burnout that you might want to ask about if you're doing a survey on this topic. And I do like this type of analysis quite a bit. I do it myself as well. I'm looking at those who agree or strongly agree with the statement. How are they different than those who disagree or strongly disagree? And usually that spread tells you a lot of insightful data that you can't from just an average. And I think, if I were to take this a step further, I would try to connect it to other outcomes as well, whether it's, let's say intent to stay. Do those who have energy after work say they're more likely to see themselves working here 2 years from now, 1 year from now, however long from now? Does that matter? Or do they see more opportunities for them in this organization because they have more energy after work as opposed to being completely drained? So I do think there's an opportunity to use a framework like this in your organization to do other type of research and tie it to, again, back to dollars, right? And quantify that for your C-suite.
No, thank you. So we looked at one, again, slightly different piece of information, and we're sharing all of this because depending on your organization, depending on your story, some of these data points might resonate more with you, might resonate more with your leadership. And so this is the other one that we asked about, right? The ability to disconnect and find time to rest, and where we saw more people were able to do that. And so again, like similar split, 58% of workers that they feel like they can disconnect are motivated to go above and beyond compared to 30% who say they don't, like they can't disconnect. And so what we compared it to is the ability to, or where you have energy, and look at this difference. So again, recently we work with a company called Water Cooler, and one of their founders, one of their advisors is Simon Sinek. And so I've had the pleasure of knowing Eitan, who's the founder of Water Cooler, and looking at some of their behavioral data. And recently, for any of you who are connected to him or Simon Sinek is one of their advisors, and he wrote up a post on some of the behavioral data that Aiton and Water Cooler found in their company, where some of the top performers work on nights and weekends. And so Simon Sinek comment was like, "Oh my gosh, in the organization I run, I actually discourage my employees to work on the weekends. I discourage them to work at night. Like, am I making a mistake?" And he said, this data really opened up my mind. And what I would say with this data, that to think about it a little bit differently. So, for example, you see all of these numbers. I analyzed them over the weekend. Why? Because I woke up, the rest of my family was sleeping, and I love data and I love this topic. And you know what? Being able to have a cup of coffee and think about a topic that I'm really passionate about felt really good. And you know what? Nobody made me do that. Nobody said, my boss didn't call me and say, "Sonia, I need this presentation on first thing on Monday, and I need you to, I don't care what you have planned over the weekend, you need to do it." So I think there is a huge, when we think about well-being and when we think about how do we measure it, what cultural norms do we set, I think there's a huge difference between mandating somebody to do something and having them have the ability to arrange their time in such a way that they do things when's best for them and that they do things that they're passionate about. And I would tell you, most people, and I think this data starts to get at that, is that I would rather feel like I have the flexibility if my child is not feeling well, if I need to go to the doctor, if there's something I would need to do during the day and I want to take some time off. I will 1,000 times rather do something in the evening and the weekend and not ever feel worried about like, oh my God, what if somebody sends me a team message and I'm not at my desk? Or what if somebody like, what if they find out that I'm not logged in right now? If you're doing the work that you need to do, the best idea is to arrange your time when you can. Again, it goes back to that capacity. Do I have the energy to do things? Maybe more so than what time am I expected to do something? And there's another study, I don't cite it here. If you're interested in it, send me a note and I'll look up the reference. I think it was Gallup as well. But it was interesting because when they did research, they found a split between people who prefer to work like 9 to 5 and then like I'm out versus people who prefer to have a flexible schedule. Like it was almost a 50% split with some difference in the type of work. Like if you're doing blue collar work versus white collar work, which makes sense because a lot of times, like some jobs just really require you to be on a little bit more than others. But that was really interesting to me too. So again, when we're thinking about capacity and when we're thinking about burnout, I wanted to highlight this data because I felt like it was really important. Serena, would you add anything to
Yeah.
this? I know we've been kind of going back and forth, but a lot of it is like nuances with like which questions do you ask and what outcome and what does it mean?
Right. And something that you said resonated with me is that we want the ability to choose how we structure our day. Like as long as we achieve the outcome we need to at work, then the rest shouldn't matter. At the beginning of the pandemic, there was a popular HBO article that said, "Forget flexibility. Your employees want autonomy." I'll toss it in the chat in a bit, because it's true, right? It's not just about being able to, come to the office or not on days that I care about. No, it's really autonomy and having the choice and the say in how I structure my day. When I'm going to work at home versus in the office, when I'm going to take meetings, when I'm not going to take meetings, and when I work on PowerPoint presentations. Is it on a weekend when my family is asleep, or is it during the weekday when I have to rush my kid, back and forth between doctor's appointments, for example? I think a lot of people are now asking very loudly for that choice and not be told how to structure their day. So yeah, so definitely makes a lot of sense, and I think that's a piece where a lot of companies are getting wrong is getting people back to the office. If you're not providing that autonomy, it's going to be really hard to get people to come back.
Yeah, absolutely. Um, so we have a couple more big topics to talk about and not a lot of time, so I'll try to stay concise on my end. Serena, this is something you and
Mm.
I talked about, and I don't know if the headline's a spoiler or what we think. Maybe. Usually, like slides are a takeaway. Now I'm like, this could have been in discussion. But um, Serena, I know you were saying recently you were part of a discussion where you ignited a lovely, energetic
Debate.
debate. Yes. And I love
Yes.
those because I think it's amazing when people agree. The truth is that if we all agreed on the best way to do work and who's what's responsibility, like we wouldn't be doing this webinar. It would be black and white. You know whose responsibility something is, and we'd be thinking about other problems and other challenges. So the general question is when it comes to well-being, there's certainly still organizations that are like, listen, like, why would employee well-being be my like, as an organization, why is it my job? Isn't it your job to drink enough water and make sure you're not stressed and exercise when you need to and, like, you eat what you need to? Like, I don't understand how it is a responsibility of an organization. Before we, touch on these numbers, I'd love for you to share your story, and I'd love for you to, talk about these different angles that you heard, because I am certain that, again, our friends on this call are thinking about similar things and that they've had different challenges and they probably debated it maybe with their direct manager, maybe with their organization, maybe with their significant other. If, that's like something that's dinner talk. I love to talk about work. My husband is so not in our field, but he gets to hear a lot about what we do. So, anyway,
Yeah.
Serena, tell us a little bit about the situation that you had, and then we can get into more of the numbers and kind of where do we think the responsibility is?
Yeah, definitely. And for those of you who are joining us live, if you're willing, I would love to hear from you. Who do you think is ultimately responsible for employee well-being in the organization? Is it the employees themselves, the direct manager, or the organization? So the debate that I hosted was where we had two groups of individuals. They didn't have a choice on which side they were going to be on, but one had to advocate for manager being ultimately responsible for employee well-being, and the other was not. And frankly, the people who were in the group that had to advocate for managers being ultimately responsible weren't all happy about it. A lot of them were saying, "Well, this is a huge liability. How can managers be responsible for things like mental health? We are not therapists. We don't have the training as a therapist to deal with mental and let alone physical health issues that our employees have." But here's the thing. Um, there was a very famous stat that came out last year that said managers actually have more impact on your mental health than your therapist, doctors, and your spouse. Okay. About 70% of people said the direct manager have the largest impact on their mental health. Does that surprise you? It didn't surprise me. But a
Wow.
lot of managers and organizations are probably in denial, saying, no, you have other things going on, whether it's, family dynamics or even your childhood issues. That's what caused you to have stress in your life. But no, we spend most of our waking moment at work, and our manager directly impacts how we spend that time and energy at work, whether it's someone who emails you after hours when you don't want to be emailed, or tosses every fire drill your way on a weekly basis, or promises you a promotion and never gives it to you for 3 years after. All those things are very stressful, and your manager has a critical role in it. So in the end, we call it a tie between the two groups. Wasn't a winner. We're all winners. But definitely the liability issue came up a lot for managers being responsible for employees' well-being in general. But I think it's no longer a nice to have. We know that employees now look at candidates, now look at whether or not your company offers mental health support before they join your company, especially the Gen Z and millennials. So, how do you actually show that you're not just offering them as benefits, but you live by those values as an organization?
Yeah.
A lot of times candidates will go on to things like Glassdoor or TikTok to see what people are saying about your organization. And I mentioned social media because not because I live and breathe it, but also because that's how your culture is showing up these days. That you can have all the benefits in the world, you can drop 7, 8 figures on your well-being programs all you want, but one viral video about a toxic manager will bring you down. That's all it takes, right? I couldn't go on my anniversary dinner because my manager made me work. I had to cancel my birthday party because we had a fire drill in data analytics, right? All just one viral video, all your 7 to 8 figure investment in employee well-being and employer brand will go down the toilet. So So definitely, I think there's another call that's not at all in this webinar, but how do you think about your employer brand as you're trying to attract the best candidates out there? It's a tough market. And guess what? An article just came out today and basically said Gen Zs are not interested in your 9 to 5 jobs anymore. They all want to just freelance. Okay. So if you can't even get them to come to work, and want to work in a traditional setting, then you have to work on your employer brand to be appealing to these candidates who want different things. So yeah, that's a lot related to well-being, from what I've seen, and I think we'll definitely see more as this new wave of Gen Z graduate from college in a few months and see where they land.
Yeah. No, and I love everything that you said, and it's so yeah, to like reiterate, the answer is the responsibility is on everyone. If the person themselves doesn't care, you can't make them, right? So it's not, I think for the organization to feel like it's their responsibility to convince employees that their well-being matters is not necessarily where our energy needs to be today. I think as an organization, our energy needs to be in understanding what things help with well-being, creating that kind of space and an opportunity for those employees who realize the importance and want that, balance and that energy to feel like they're in an environment and in a space where they can get that. So I think that's where the organizational responsibility is. I think the one thing, Serena, that you were saying, and this, stopped me in my tracks. And I think it was especially at the beginning of the pandemic, is like you were saying, people telling managers it's their responsibility. It is and it isn't. And what I mean is that if you are a jerk, good employees will leave you because they don't want that, right? And they have options. Like, why? Why would somebody who's truly amazing stay working for somebody that makes their life hell? Like, it just intuitively doesn't make sense. Like, we don't need stats for that. There are options. And for
Yes.
people that are saying, listen, like, I care, I want to have the energy to go and have fun with friends, to go have a dinner. Like, I don't want to be exhausted all the time, and this person is just making my life hell unnecessarily. That won't work. On the
Mm,
flip side, though, I think it's important for organizations not to put all the responsibilities on the managers. You can have them look for resources. You can have them
right,
look for programs. Like, that's not fair either, because at the end of the day, they have a job that they do need to meet their targets and they do need to meet their goals. So I think we need to be very clear. And I think inside your organizations, it's important to think about that, to say, yes, you, as a manager, it's important to show up for their people. It's important to ask how they're doing. It's important, there's going to be emergencies, but take a step back and think about, is every time you mention somebody, it's every time that you cause stress, was it necessary? Are there places where we can manage something during work hours and do that more effectively? And then again, in the organizations, and it's to support the managers, it's to give them to resources, to educate. So I feel like what Serena and I are saying for us is intuitive, but probably not for every manager. Like, they
right.
think they were, when you think about it, in most job descriptions, you look and there's no line item care about your
No.
people. Like, you're responsible to bring in this kind of work, and
Yeah.
you're responsible to ship this many products, and you're responsible
Yep.
to create this many number of leads, depending on what your role is. And so I've had people say, like, listen, I'm struggling because my managers are saying this was nowhere in my job description. So either educate or put it in the job description, but think about very carefully, because the managers do have such a tremendous impact. Think about
Right.
educating them on the best way to interact, and then think about providing them the resources that they need to really succeed. So we'll do this real quick because we have one more slide. So um, talking about the manager relationships, here's some more data, shockingly, right? So all this talks about is that individuals who, there's a big relationship between satisfaction with their well-being, and whether they believe their managers care. So those who strongly agree that they're satisfied with their well-being say that their well-being matters to their managers. And on the flip side, 11 of those who strongly disagree say that their helping and health matter to their manager. Again, this is not necessarily causational, it's correlational, but there is a big relationship, right, between how good my well being is. And so whether my manager is making my life hell, and that's why like my well-being is low, or I don't have my manager doesn't care and they're not supporting me. So again, just the impact and outcome, and then also looking at the same as energy, even a more stark difference in those who say they have enough energy that are saying their managers care. So you can think about that, the expectations, the time commitment, the respect for lives inside and outside of work. So why the relationship with manager really matters with somebody's well-being. And though this is our last slide, and I know we've been doing live Q&A, so we might have a couple minutes, but you can always get a hold of us afterwards as well. So what are some ways to drive ROI? What are some ways to measure? So, the first thing that I'll say about the top row, and I'd love, Serena, your impact, is that like anything else, you can't assume you'll launch something and it'll just go. Even if, let's say, you did a survey and everybody really wanted more well being, your more resources, your employees are not really satisfied with what's going on in the open ended comments, they're asking for more. I'll tell you, I've been in product development my entire career, and developing something has always been significantly easier than making sure there's usage after. It doesn't matter what program it is, it doesn't matter what product it is 100% true. So, for some of you that are maybe newer to this and you're thinking, oh, we're doing so much heavy lifting setting this up, and we're talking to this vendor, this company, and we've launched, and whew, I can finally breathe. Oh, hold on to your seats because that's when the hard work starts. And again, I know intuitively you might be thinking, but Sonia, like, why do I now need to work on something that people asked for? Because people are people. And you need to think about, how does this fit into their schedule? Do they remember it still exists? Serena, I'd love your thoughts on like what you've seen for adoptions for organizations, and some like maybe misses and then some hits for where it actually really effectively took off.
Yeah, no, I like the point around ambassadors a lot, because I've seen organizations where leaders are championing well-being as something that they personally care about. And maybe they do it with their team. Maybe they together schedule some time on their calendar for self-care. Maybe they schedule something together to actually use the program and a new benefit that is launched. Those are all really helpful, and communicating that to the broader audience, whether you want to use internal communication channels or external social media, and showcase that you as a company care about well-being and you have leaders who are using the programs. I think that's all very helpful, and raises the awareness. It's not just, hey, here's the code and go log in. On the flip side, I've seen things like mental health benefits, or whether it's things like anywhere from yoga to meditation apps that have been rolled out since COVID with such low usage, from the vendors I've talked to, organizations I supported. When we got the numbers back, we were shocked. I won't disclose the numbers, but if you are in this space, I encourage you to actually check the number in your organization and see what percentage of employees have actually logged in the past months. And hopefully your vendor is able to provide that easily. That should be an easy data point to provide. And we were shocked that a lot of people didn't even know it existed. And the communications team said, "Hey, we did our job. We sent out the emails. We sent out all the posts. And why aren't people using it? It must be the technology's problem." No, it's usually a process problem that it's not embedded in my day to day. And suddenly, well being became something else I had to do. When well being becomes something else employees have to do, it's for sure going to fail. So I think definitely create that communication upfront and find your champion, especially senior leaders. It can be very influential in getting people to try something. And then also make the space. If you're a leader, make that time on the calendar instead of a team meeting. Maybe do a team meditation, a team yoga, a team self care, what have you, and just give it a try and see if people appreciate that. And if they do, rinse and repeat. If they don't, try something else. So yeah, I'll pause there. So Sonia, you can get to the last ROI piece.
No, thank you. And what Serena was saying, just to reiterate, it is like depending on your company size, your team, like marketing can be your best ally in helping with some of these things
Yeah.
because a lot of times I don't like what Serena was saying. Sometimes just pushing the information is not quite enough, but it's necessary. It's an important step to raise that awareness and then triangulate it with data and then really help integrate it as a part of people's day to day. So, finally, measuring ROI. Of course, we'd recommend asking about it on surveys. A lot of times, what I found is exactly like what we said before. If there are people who are not using it, what's the reason? Like,
Yes.
and a lot of times, like, I'll even find exactly, Serena, what you were saying is like, I don't have time. Like, I have so much to do in my day. Like, thank you for this resource, but I can't possibly know when to do it. So, it's like Serena made a suggestion, like a manager making space for it, inserting it into a regular meeting. It's sometimes it can be just a little bit of time that really makes a huge difference. But understanding for those, how's everything going? What do you like about the program? Where are we missing the mark? And then, especially for the individuals that can't get to it, like what are the reasons so you can remove those obstacles? And I think surveys are a great place to really find that out at scale. Usually, surveys are one of the easier ways to do it too. Like the next step up is comparing usage data. So, can you pull productivity? Can you pull performance? Can you pull absenteeism? A lot of times, you can combine your survey data and people's experience with well being, people's relationship with manager, and combine them with actual behavioral data, which becomes even more powerful, right? So, this is almost like steps and resources. And then I would say, no matter what data you have access to or what you can bring together, like we're coming back full circle, right, Serena, from what you said at the beginning,
Yes.
is as much as possible tie the data to dollars,
Yeah.
quantify the
Money
impact.
talks.
Yes, yes. So if people are missing work, what's your average salary? How many hours are you missing? If there's a turnover, and you probably know at least roughly how much it costs you to hire another person, as much as you can put those dollar signs, they don't have to be exact. They need to be realistic. So run and by a few people before you talk to your CEO or head of HR, depending what
Yep.
position you're in, to pass like the logic test. That they're like, well, what about this? And what about that? Again, the numbers don't have to be perfect, even if they're a rough estimate that you feel like in your methodology you can justify, that'll speak volumes. Serena, Annie, I know we're at Q&A and I know we're at time. We're 1 minute over. I don't know if you have any. So for all of you, I know you've been engaging in the chat. You've been asking different questions. If anything's burning now, please still put it in the chat and we'll make sure to get to you. If you're thinking about something and it's still top of mind after the webinar, don't hesitate to reach out. But I would say as we wrap up, I'll leave you our contact information. Would love to connect on LinkedIn. Serena put her contact information in the chat too. Serena, do you have any last words of wisdom or advice that you'd leave our audience with before we sign off?
Yes, please take care of yourself because you cannot pour from an empty cup. And I just want to make sure that you all carve out time to take care of you because your organization needs you and there's a lot of people who count on you. So take care of you first. And it's not selfish to do self care.
Yeah. Thank you so much. And I definitely echo that. I'm so grateful for all of you who joined us. Trust me, it fills our hearts because this is something that Serena and I find so incredibly important and obviously spend a lot of our professional and personal time thinking about. So grateful to have had you here. We had a couple of questions that we weren't able to get to, so we'll make sure to respond to you after the webinar. Thank you, Serena, infinitely for always being such a great partner in these important conversations. And thank you all who joined us for your time. Again, it's the best gift that you could ever give us. So thank you for coming. Please don't hesitate to get in touch and wishing you just the best of luck and the best of success on your well-being programs and your organization.